Oh, that's a bit anemic.
Which was a bit anemic. No expense was spared in the production.
Come on, Politico. Do a bigger bell. We need a bigger bell.
We've been on the road for quite a long time. Well, that was the division bell, despite my guest, Andrew Griffith's immediately negative comments on the quality of the bell. Andrew, welcome. Thanks for taking time to join us. Of course, Shadow Business, a hugely important brief at this conference. And welcome to our Politico Pub. I think you've already been busy. It's been a morning of busy announcements here in Manchester. Your colleague, the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, telling us the pub landlords might be particularly happy, but so will other businesses, at the announcement that he wants to scrap business rates for 250,000 pubs, restaurants and similar companies. The price tag, at least the price tag he's putting on it, is $4 billion. Now, how on earth is this being funded? And is that part of this 47 billion spending cuts money, which controversially, some people think it may not be entirely right, but let's say that 47 billion, would that include this new proposal?
Yes. So that's how, in the answer to your simple question, that's how it's funded. And it's a really important policy. You know, we're all in the business of words, but it's actions that matter. The Shadow Chancellor's laid out some really tough choices. They won't be easy. Not everyone will agree with those. But that's the job of work of government. But that gives you the ability to then put back and support sectors of the economy. And why retail, hospitality and leisure? Because it has been uniquely clobbered to the tune of about 100,000 jobs, objective data, by the jobs tax, the change in NI thresholds. And if you want to deal with one of the biggest challenges we've got in society, which is the number of young people in particular who would like to be in work but are not, then think about the sectors that give people their first chance. My first job was in retail. I worked at my local Tesco's. I've made more hot cross buns and donuts than one would ever care to think about. But typically, the sector does a great job at making people work ready, giving people their opportunities. It's a sector where you can literally go from behind the bar to running a large group of businesses. And so when we think about the choices, the people whose side we are on, clearly it's wider than just that sector, to be clear, but people whose side we're on, this is a really, really strong candidate, and they're really suffering at the moment. So that is one of the things that we can do to help, and the next Conservative government would do that.
But as you say, Andrew, to get there, you're saying that this has to be part of this 47 billion, this big number that was put out there in extra spending cuts. Now, we might go to some of those in a moment in a bit more detail, but for a lot of people hearing that, it does sound a bit like New Age of Austerity Mark II, and a lot of the electorate blamed Conservatives for that. It sort of was the beginning of a loosening of their bond with the Conservative Party, and it's such a big figure, a hostage to fortune, you could say, to be offering that this far out from the election. Why do it?
Well, you've got to lay out the choices you're going to make. I mean, the big change, we're under new management, the big change, if you like, is the honesty about the state of the public finances. You know, you can see that. That has not all happened under this government, but they are absolutely attenuating that. You can see it in things like the price that the government has to pay for its borrowing, the fact that the Chancellor is putting us in this sort of doom loop where you put together a budget, you say you've got a little bit of headroom, then the economy declines a bit further, you come back and say there's a bigger hole that needs to be filled. So you can see, objective truth, the state of the public finances, and any government needs to make hard choices. You know, I came from the world of business. You had to make hard choices. Marketing department doesn't always love you. The sales department doesn't love you, but you have to balance the books at the end of the day. Now, government finances are much worse than that. We have not balanced our books as a country on a current account basis for a quarter of a century. So, you know, you say, look, these are big numbers, and of course they're big numbers. They're not actually that big numbers in terms of either the overall size of the government, nor the expansion that we've seen in the welfare state. And if somebody doesn't get to grips with that, we're not going to have the sort of government, sort of economy that we want.
Yeah, but if you're saying for this government, it's getting into doom loop because it then finds reality is different and then it has to come and the black hole gets bigger, then presumably the same analysis would apply, right? That your 47 billion might also not go as far as you hoped it would. So I mean, it isn't exactly the same trap that by putting a figure on it so early that you've committed yourself, this leader, or any potential, were it to happen, successor to this leader is now tied to this figure.
No, I don't agree with that, but let me just unpack that a little bit. First of all, there is a difference because these are talking about choices. At the end of the day, of course, you put a number against them, but they are choices about the sort of, in particular, the sort of welfare system we want to see, a welfare system that's fair, and the choices embedded within that. And then from those choices flow some numbers because we all need numbers to have that currency. But there is a real difference between setting out a set of, if you like, spending cuts or spending less and spending more and believing that that is the way to grow. And that's is a clear dividing line. People will choose their own side of that to be on between a chancellor that comes out and says, well, I'm very pleased and happy. I'm going to be spending £40 billion a year more. And that is how I'm going to grow the economy. A chancellor that says, or a government that says we're going to put 120,000 words, 330 pages of red tape on employment, but yet miraculously people are going to carry on employing people at the same rate they were before. That's just not the real world. That's the difference. And this is a down payment on financial responsibility that you should expect from every government and that you will absolutely want from the next Conservative government.
But it's very specific, isn't it? 23 billion from the welfare bill by drastically reducing eligibility for non-Brits, reversing or maintaining, rather, the two-child benefit cap, depending on where Labour is on that. And then this category of slashing PIP, so those entitlements for low-level mental health issues. Again, not very clearly defined. All governments have found it harder when they really get into trying to get into that welfare bill. Well, the fact that costs have an awkward habit. People are odd creatures. They may present on one spreadsheet as being in one category, and then you find that the cost is somehow moved over to another. As you say, you are used to putting big targets on numbers, but you're also very aware of the fact that these numbers often don't really work out in reality. And that's why I press you on the fact that actually it is a relatively high number. I can't think of another party at this stage in the cycle that would have made such a clear commitment. You must have had some qualms about it. The business side of Andrew Griffith maybe had a little moment when you saw that one coming out of the leader's office.
No, look, the business side is extremely happy. I mean, look, you're right. I mean, we shouldn't, these are not gravitational constants, and you understand that. But in public discourse,
what does that mean? Sorry.
Well, it means they're not. You
mean they're not true?
They're not. No. It means they're not. When you make judgments about numbers, some numbers have quantum atomic accuracy, and others are a view about what the best estimate will be. Now, I think they are credible because
quantum atomic is definitely a word we've never had in the pub before.
Right, there you go. Former science minister. But
it sounds like you're saying they're very rough figures.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, you're right that in putting together any set of numbers, there are judgments. Now, in this case, this is a well-documented area. People have seen the expansion in the cost of welfare. The welfare budget itself is scrutinised by Parliament. It's looked at by the OBR. Sir Mel Stride is the former welfare minister himself who dealt with these policies and the implications of that. And you'll hear more from Helen about the policy choices embedded within it. So no, I don't think there's mileage in trying to diss the numbers. I'm very happy with the fact that the Conservative Party is taking a view about, look, what are going to be the difficult choices? And the merit of doing that in advance is light years away from what the government have done, which is they didn't talk about winter fuel at all. They talked about tightening up some of the criteria for welfare. Because they hadn't done that work in advance, because it wasn't baked into any numbers, and because they hadn't talked about the trade-offs in public, as soon as that idea, and as far as I can see, Rachel Reeves cooked that up when she had a black hole, not because of some moral purpose and mission, as soon as that met the reality of the modern Labour Party, they lost it and they couldn't get it through. This is a very, very different approach. Whatever people like or not, it is a very different approach of litigating that up front and being clear the choices we'll make and the people whose side we are on. We're on the side of publicans because we're willing to reinvest that back in that business rates relief.
Now, the biggest long-term contributor to rising public spending, as you well know, is the cost of pensions and support for the elderly. And the OBR says that the annual cost of the triple lock policy is estimated now to reach 15.5 billion by 2030, and state pension is also forecast to increase to about 7.7% of the economy by the 2070s. So these are very sizable numbers. and yet they're not, I think, reflected in anything that we've heard addressed by Conservatives so far. So why leave this alone? Do you think that's an area really you're going to have to move into if you want to get, as you say, books not even to balance, but books to look like they're in a healthier state?
Look, that's an ongoing debate, if you like. All the other areas of policy are things yet to be determined in the light of situations at the time. The biggest challenge we've got at the moment is actually not the triple lock, because that links to earnings, and earnings, look like they're about to rise at a much, much lower rate because of actions and choices the Chancellor's taken. But conversely, we are dealing with a big increase in inflation. And that's not the triple lock, that's the double lock. That has a big price because inflation's approaching 4%. And I think most people would say that pensioners whose opportunity to earn an income, to change their financial circumstances is now behind them, should be protected from inflation. That's the double lock, if you like, not the triple lock. And so the best thing that the government can do is to get to grips with inflation. Actually, they're doing the opposite. They're putting more costs through the supply chain, they're imposing barriers, high energy costs, and all of that is what's causing this big increase in inflation.
I think we've heard a tone from you, from the Shadow Chancellor this morning, that wants to sort of make the argument, bring the Conservatives, if you like, off the naughty step when it comes to the economy and out of the era of Trussonomics. But why should the public pay much heed to that, given the failure to control spending in the wake of Brexit? Do you think it's still actually quite hard to portray yourselves as sound managers on the economy?
I think for sure it will take time. And I think the difference to me is having what you're seeing today and you'll see in other domains is a clear set of plans. I don't think that the next election is a trust me. I think it's a show me. I think people want to see whichever party, having been wildly suckered in by this government, which has collapsed at a genuinely unprecedented rate in political history. I think that people are crying out, and I'm not saying they'll. I'm not saying they'll yet be with.
Government did also collapse at quite a rate, several times. I'm
not saying people are there. I'm not saying people are there yet. I think it will take time. But how do you engage with people? Clear plans. What are the choices you're going to make? Whose side are you on? And then if we hold ourselves together, and if we're united, and if we look like we are sensible, credible people, which I acknowledge we did not always in government, then I think the electorate will give us a chance. And particularly if, as I believe, the defining issue of the next election will be the state of the economy. And how do you do that essential ingredient of democracy, which is give people hope and make them believe credibly that their children can be better off than they themselves were. That's where the West has been failing. And I honestly think that under Kemi's leadership, we're starting to get into the hard yards of that really difficult debate.
Let's touch on some other areas, because you've got a very nice, wide-ranging brief. And you penned a piece for The Telegraph with Dame Priti Patel at the weekend, saying no longer would burnishing credentials as a member of the lanyard classes.
So you cheer.
Yay! Sorry, I think everyone's had that joke.
We've got a lanyard.
They've all had that joke so often. They're like, yeah. But your credentials, the lanyard classes of Westminster, this credentialism, that would no longer be a ticket to an ambassadorial appointment necessarily. And you said this, or jointly said, nothing less than a cultural revolution towards commerce is needed. One hopes not of the Chinese variety, otherwise that would be a short-lived time for your ambassadors. But trying to appoint diplomats from outside the ranks of the traditional routes, particularly the Foreign Office, hasn't gone very well, has it? I mean, look at the Peter Mandelson saga. It's not give you warning.
These will not be political appointments, Anne. So let me try and let's think about this. I mean, chairman of big international banks. If you run a big, it'd be invidious if I start picking names. You'll all rush off and say something.
Oh yes, please.
Such. Yeah, I know you would like that.
Yeah, well,
if you've run a big international organisation, by definition, you've worked in other markets. Former Lord Mayors of London, as City Minister, I had the privilege of working with multiple former Lord Mayors of London. They already perform an ambassadorial role. And this is not saying that every market, some of which where we've got troops stationed, where we've got very significant security equities, that this would apply. But there are also many, many other countries in the world where the prime opportunity is economic. As Shadow Secretary of State for Trade, it's my job to think, how can we find new markets? This is not a country that can reconcile our ambition for prosperity with our domestic market. right? I mean, if you're the US, I mean, no one really does that these days, but if you're the US or China, you probably have a very nice standard of living selling just to yourself. That is not true of the United Kingdom. We've tumbled down the GDP per capita rankings. I'm not happy about that. No one should be happy about that. What's one of the levers that you can pull? It's trade and finding export markets. Those are marginal.
So this would not be, for instance, to send an ambassador to Washington.
I mean, let's say no, right? Let's
So it's more for emerging economies.
We're thinking about those. It's a sensible policy, and we shouldn't cling to the extremity that essentially says every single person representing the UK as an ambassador has to either have worked in King Charles Street for their entire career or very, very occasionally be a political appointee. Right? It's not that. It's saying, look, let's look at the job in hand, which is often a job of opening markets, representing the UK, yes, representing His Majesty. Could there possibly be people at the top of other industries that could do that job equally well? And would we be open to that as part of a broader strategy of saying everybody, and this is as important as the individual, everybody who's working in an overseas embassy should be very focused on a trade, sales, exports KPI.
Might be a job for you.
Well, now I'd count as a political appointee. Maybe once upon a time I wouldn't have done, but now they'd all jump up and down. Anyway, I've got a job.
You're hanging on to it, right? What's your view of the government's approach to subsidy? I'm thinking particularly of the JLR, that credit guarantee following a very serious cyber attack there. I mean, there's one narrative we heard a lot at Labour coming under pressure last week. I was interviewing Peter Carr, their business secretary. Did Labour do enough? Was it acting fast enough? I think as more detail has come out, there's a bit of a reality check there. Did JLR do enough in terms of due diligence to protect itself? After all, it's a big company. It's got Tata behind it. What on earth is it doing running to the British taxpayer when it hasn't sorted out its cyber security? Do you think we're actually expecting the state to do too much in bailing out companies like that?
I think bailout subsidies should be a last resort, not the first resort. So I don't think anyone should be trigger happy about those things. I think on British Steel, a slightly different position I would have taken. On JLR and actually the constant attacks on now British businesses and enterprises on cyber, I don't think we should be negligent or wash our hands of that. There isn't a fully insurable market, in my experience, in cyber. A little bit like terrorism. In terrorism, you remember the Bishopsgate bombing in the City of London, and as a result of that, the government set up a pool reinsurance scheme. We're getting into the bowels of this now, but actually that worked really well. It's made money, if you like, for the taxpayer because it required people to chip in. It avoided most of the moral hazard, which you do get if the government steps in too quickly by having it sat behind other commercial insurance.
You're not that far away from the Labour position.
I'm not, no, and I think there could be
in that case,
a tiny bit.
You
see, you're only interested in division, in division and dissent. But,
no, I think there are just other things that probably are more on.
I think in cyber, you've got this grey area of what is the involvement of states and state actors, and we don't have a full private insurance market.
Yeah. So let's have a word about Europe and where we stand there, but particularly looking at our trade and business outlook. We had some polling from Politico showing that the agri-food deal agreed by the government in principle with Brussels is popular with Remainers and Leavers alike. They want to get past this stuff, even when they're told it does mean following EU rules, so alignment in that sphere. If industry and the public are in favour, why would you oppose it?
Look, don't oppose anything for opposition's sake, right? Genuinely, I'm delighted the Prime Minister's off leading a trade delegation to India. Fantastic, right? That's a really, really important market that can help our country grow. But conversely, and of course we're all in favour when it's couched in terms of a poll as wouldn't it be good to sort of remove this particular friction and have these particular rules? Of course we're in favour of that. But then if the flip side that is not surfaced in that polling is it may in future prevent you exploiting other opportunities, tying our energy emissions trading scheme to the Europe, imposing a carbon border tariff, for want of a better word, may impede that very ability to get concessions from India that might unlock big opportunities for financial and professional services. So I think I'm a fairly balanced politician. I don't think the debate should be at the extremity, but you've got to be very careful about understanding what's the unintended consequences. And I really hope the Prime Minister is a convert to having an independence trade strategy, because he's been, to some degree, a beneficiary of that. We were in the room in Washington alone, while 27 other nations were working out what their approach to trade would be.
Let's squeeze one more in, and I'm going to go out to the floor. Big talking point here has become what is the position of the Conservative Party now on EU citizens, settled status, etc., who will be able to access benefits and broadly who won't. Now, some officials have already conceded to my London playbook colleagues who are scattered around here with they're gimlet trained on this, that EU citizens who have settled status would still be able to access benefits, and that materially affects the calculation of what that was supposed to save. Your view on that, because that's where the sort of any fault in the maths does become quantonomically difficult for you.
I will. It won't be quantonomically difficult, but I will leave that. I will leave the detail of that to others. You can talk to Helen.
My sense is
Helen
more because you connect the UK to the wider world. Let me put it in that way, because I'm really, I know it is not your business in the detail, but that is the sort of thing. It sort of unsettles people. When I'm writing in a German newspaper, they're like, "What's going on with this thing?" And I think it does affect the perception of the UK, and they would maybe, a lot of foreign trade partners might say, are you really, still into kind of having us around in the UK, or are you always going to be coming after us with another attack on settled status? And do you accept that that's a risk in this argument?
Look, actually, what I accept is it's actually a moving feast. I spent a lot of time in Germany when I was working. They had a very, very different system now. Now, every day I look at the latest speech or proposal from Friedrich Merz, and it's very different. Sometimes it's a bit of a time lapse as to where we were having the same debate. So, again, I think, I don't ever want to cede the idea that the UK will be an outward-looking, nation that has rule of law and respects partners, and actually is a very valued partner to do business with. That is my sense as I travel around the world. And as for the detail, I don't think it'll be in opposition to that, but you should talk to Helen or Mel.
Right. Okay, let's get some questions. And let's go first to our own UK trade maestro, Sophie Inge. Where's Sophie? That away.
Thank you, Anne. I had another question about trade. So at the Labour conference, Trade Minister Chris Bryant said that he wanted a UK Mercosur agreement, which, as you know, EU efforts to secure a Mercosur agreement have been deeply controversial. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Very open to it in principle. That's not the position of the government, interestingly, because they're going for a much deeper entanglement on things like SPS than Mercosur itself would do. But I also, the yin to that yang is also, I want to hear from Labour ministers, because they are our government, and I'm a patriot, and I want our economy to grow. I want to hear more from them about the opportunities of CPTPP. A bit of a tongue twister, but last week I was in Taiwan. That's a fantastic market. They want to do more with us. Rate of GDP per capita growth in Taiwan, 8% currently, average of 4% for the last decade. That's a important market and opportunity. And if I am Trade Secretary, we will spend as much time on those markets as we will trying to eliminate almost diminishing frictions. You talked about the SPS deal and the whole trade debate. We spend a lot of time, on the short straits and SPS at the frontier. The truth is, and we just had a big farming rally outside, is we import far more foodstuffs from the European Union than we export. So wearing that my job is not to feed the nation. My job is to help us grow our economy. From that perspective, that's not something that's a big distraction compared with the opportunities of the wider world.
Anyone else like to ask a question? Yes, there. Anyone at the back, give me a good wave. I'm a bit long-sighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Mollett from Relics PLC. Yesterday we heard Kemi Badenoch say she would bring the UK out of ECHR. Now, clearly there's no direct link between that and trade agreements, but at a time when you would be in government trying to form trade relationships with international partners, would you not be concerned they might look askance or it changes the mood music if the UK is walking away from other international agreements?
Not really. Obviously it's up to the receiver to make those connections in their mind. The truth is that we have always had the highest standards of human rights. We were world leader in efforts to eliminate the slavery from the world. And the accession of the UK to the ECHR is relatively new in historical terms. We should look to Parliament and democracy and the consensus that we have as a society about how we should treat each other as human beings, not to any one particular treaty at any one particular moment in time. And I think there are real impedances. I mean, the businesses I talk to, it's just hard to get stuff done, right? It's just hard. We're slow. We're competing with one arm tied behind our back because in other countries they're able to build infrastructure much more quickly. And some of that does go back to that thicket of human rights and equality and the duties of to consult and the expansionist approach of the judiciary in areas like judicial review. And so, if you're serious about growth, and I don't accept, as you heard, I don't really accept the trade-off between adherence to one particular international treaty, then you absolutely, I'm afraid, have to put into the field of play fundamental reform of how the English legal system works. I think Parliament's got its job to do as well, and the system reform of government is not unimportant, but you should absolutely bring that onto the pitch, and I think we can reconcile that with allies and colleagues.
So we're nearly out of time, but given your business background, I can't resist asking you about a line that Kemi Badenoch gave me when we interviewed her last week, when she said that she was turning around a distressed asset in the Conservative Party. And as a former business figure yourself, and do you see the state of your party the same way? I mean, there's an argument in a distressed asset for A, getting rid of it, or B, a merger, isn't there?
Well,
you can have a sense of humour if you want.
The primary thing you do with a distressed asset is try and turn it around, and it's a jolly hard job. But that's also the big upside opportunity. So do I accept that? Yeah, look, being open and fair, I do. I mean, if you look at not just our transient poll ratings, but the issue about trust, which is true of all political parties, but definitely as an incumbent party, we've had that issue as well in recent years. And so changing how people think about us. Like my simple version of this, 4 Ps. Principles, which are essentially unchanged than if you walked into the Thatcher Hall and heard about the challenges and the policy, the principles that we applied in the 70s and 80s. Policies which are applying those to the greatest moment, the greatest challenges of a particular moment, whether it's how do you get the nation building again, how do you deal with growth, what's the trade strategy post-Brexit. That's your policies. And then behind that, or underneath that, are plans and people, right? And plans, I think, is where the key debate and action for the next election is. It's why we are maybe taking more risk, coming out with more clarity on policy at an earlier stage in the cycle. By the way, the cycle's bust, right? I mean, the cycle does not have the idea that a government would come in with a record ever majority and then have record bad polling for its leader and its party.
And a surge of reform, which you haven't mentioned.
Exactly, and the surge of other new entrants, the Greens reforms. It's a competitive domain, right? And we've chosen to compete in business terms. We've chosen to compete in that competitive domain, right? So you have to put your best foot forward. The point about plans is it can give you credibility and trust, right? In a world where people are not that promiscuous about who they trust. And people, which is my ambassadors, is a small example of that, is how are you actually going to do it? You and whose army? Well, actually, we will recruit an army of people, not exclusively from business, but including a lot of people from business who recognise the challenge that we face. And that business as usual answers aren't going to do it.
But when donors walk out of the door, and that was a story that we ran, my colleague Sam Coates, well from your Sky incarnation, I mean, that can't make you feel great about this. If you say, here we are with our 4 Ps and we're all going forward, but the very people who they're very reactive to what they think, who's got the offer on business are walking out of the door. Does that pain you when you see that you lose?
Yes. But everyone, go back to business, everyone is either a customer or a potential customer. So does it pain me? Yeah, for sure. I mean, it pains me enormously as a patriot that hundreds of thousands of people arguably are leaving our country, literally leaving our country, not our party, for Milan and Abu Dhabi and other countries around the world, because they just think they're going to get a better life and better opportunities. I mean, that's painful. But in terms of, donors or individuals, it's a competitive domain. People have choices. What do you do to respond? You raise your game, you lay out your offering, and you seek to engage and persuade people why they're making the wrong decision and that they should come back and back you.
Andrew Griffith, thank you very much.
Thank
Great
you.
note to end on.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.